then with Alessio Sakara with the bright fire engine, red hair, I started bleeding, but I was sweating so much, my dye was also leaking, so it actually made the blood look worse. I'm like, oh, I'll learn that lesson the hard way. So now as my kids are starting to get a little bit older, they're probably going to, in a couple of years, be old enough to get a video game console. So I'll make sure I pull out the old PS2 and hopefully it still works. So they can play with Dad's character, and we'll definitely grab the new versions of the game and have a play of them as well. Comes up to me one day, just hands me this VHS tape. He goes, check this out. And, it was UFC 2, and I'm like, God damn, what is this? This is awesome. Hi, my name is Elvis Sinosic. I am known as the King of Rock and Rumble. I'm the owner of King's Academy of Martial Arts here in Sydney. You're on Split Decisions, best talk show around. It's good to be here.
What's up, everybody? Rob J. Speck, the host here, and another episode of Split Decisions. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, what is Split Decisions? Well, it's our combat sports show that talks about the very best things in combat sports, the best topics, hottest topics, and we bring you special guests, noted people in the MMA community, and this time is no different. We have the icon of Australian MMA, Elvis Sinosic. How you doing, sir?
Good, thanks, Rob. Good to be the king.
It's great to be the king, my man. So, with that being said, I gotta ask you, what does it mean to you to be basically the pioneer of Australian MMA, single-handedly? There's no second guy.
Well, look, to be honest, there are some other guys that were kind of around in that era. They just didn't make it into the UFC. Like there was Larry Papadopoulos, who was in Shudo, and Chris Hazelman in rings. So there were some combat sports guys. I mean, honestly, it's pretty awesome, to be able to look back and realize that I was one of the pioneers, one of the main pioneers of Australian MMA and jiu-jitsu here in Australia. It's pretty awe-inspiring. Though realistically, at the time, I was just doing something different. I was doing something that was exciting and fun, and that allowed me to challenge myself. And that's really what it was all about. It was more about challenging myself and discovering my own personal limits.
I hear that a lot from pioneers, basically the pioneers. I'll just leave it at that. They all have that common thread of I was chasing self-satisfaction and I landed in this wonderful sport called MMA. I rose to the challenge of the sport. Basically, that seems like the same story for you.
Yeah, look, it does seem to be a fairly common thread. I guess at the time, we didn't really think of it as pioneering. It was just something new that was there, and an opportunity to challenge yourself. And there were people that were doing it for different reasons. For myself, at the time, it was about challenging myself to see what my limits were. It was about seeing crazy. Like everyone's different. People learn at different rates and pick up things. And there was a certain element where I wanted to test my own personal fortitude, my courage, and my ability to face adversity. Like the greatest adversity that you can kind of have is someone there facing opposite you, wanting to hurt you. We've all a lot of us have done martial arts for most of our lives, and we want to know if it's effective, but it's not just about being effective, but whether we actually have the courage to actually apply those skills. So that's really what it was about for me at the time.
There you go. Sorry, go ahead, Ricky.
I'm sure it must have been a little bit different for you too, right? Being in Australia, having that background, the pipeline to the UFC, I would assume, wasn't as clear as maybe some people stateside, where it was like they're looking for fighters in that region. How was that transition for you? Like, how did you get your foot into the door? How did you get recognized and get in there?
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. I mean, back then, I started fighting in 97. I kind of discovered sport around 93, 94, just when it was kind of coming about. I used to do martial arts. I did judo when I was little, and I did taekwondo, and then I went to college, and I kind of stopped doing it for a while. I ended up going to university. While I was at university, I stopped doing martial arts, and I actually started playing volleyball. I kind of got into beach volleyball, eventually transitioning into pro beach volleyball. So that's kind of interesting. I did a degree in IT, so it's kind of all pretty varied there. I discovered the UFC or jiu-jitsu through a magazine called Blitz magazine, which was at the time was owned by John Will, who was the person that brought Brazilian jiu-jitsu to Australia, by going over to Brazil. So we didn't have the internet, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have online streaming, even the news services and a lot of the social media didn't really exist. We kind of had bulletin boards and mailing lists. So I kind of discovered this when I started working. So I finished university and I got this, started working in a full-time job, and that itself was pretty crazy, going from studying full-time to working full-time.
Yeah.
There was a guy in my IT department, worked in a different area, but I went to primary school with him. So I kind of lost touch with him in high school and college. But when I got to work, he was there, and he used to do Kyokushin karate, and he knew I did Taekwondo. And so he kind of comes up to me one day and just hands me this VHS tape. He goes, check this out. And, it was UFC 2, and I'm like, God damn, what is this? This is awesome. Like, I kind of read a little bit about the magazines, but didn't really kind of appreciate what it was until I watched this tape, and I went, wow, this is freaking awesome, unbelievable. It's like, back then it was style versus style. It was about seeing which martial art was the best, and it has changed till then. Now it's more about which athlete is best, which person has the best skills, because everyone nowadays cross-trains. But back then it was just looking at the different martial arts, and then I came back a couple of days later, handed him back the tape, and he hands me this form to a martial arts tournament called National AllStars back then. He goes, how cool was that? And I'm like, yeah, that was great. And he goes, I challenge you, I dare you to enter this competition. You've got 1 month to prepare.
Yeah.
I went, well, I haven't done martial arts. I did it for quite a few years when I was, as I said, up until I was about 15 or 16 sort of thing. I'd done the martial arts training, and now I'm early 20s, and I'm like, I wouldn't mind doing it again. I kind of missed the martial arts training. So I took the form, and then I started Googling. Well, I wasn't even Googling. I had to pull out the Yellow Pages book and go through page by page into the martial arts, trying to find. That was our old school Google, was Yellow Pages. I mean, it's bizarre when you think back to it, Dan. I found there was no jiu-jitsu or anything like that back then, but I found a school that was Chun Fan, which is the pre-Jeet Kune Do Bruce Lee style, and they kind of said they did grappling and striking. I'm like, I've got this interest in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They do some, so I'll jump into that school. So I jumped into that school, started training there, entered the National All-Stars, and a month later entered the tournament, and I ended up, I think, coming second in the black belt point fighting, and then winning the continuous fighting, or the other way around. I can't remember. But it kind of reignited my passion in the martial arts, and it's kind of where I started that journey where I'm heading now. So the journey kind of commenced, and then, I started jumping onto bulletin boards, not even online forums, and I found a mailing list called the Combat List. So on that list was a promoter for an event called, didn't even exist at the time. Eventually it becomes TKO, which is what GSP came out of, but it was called UCC, Universal Combat Challenge. They were talking about starting an event. They hadn't even had an event. And there was this little known guy called Joe Silver on there, who was an assistant to this man called Pirelli, who was matchmaker in the UFC. And, we just started discussing fighting, and everyone was kind of chatting, talking about it. And back then, we were talking UFC, we were talking Pride, we were talking K1, Judo, hand crash rings, all the different sort of combat styles. So, I mean, I even look back, and I think it's pretty crazy that through that I managed to make that connection. It's only because through that connection that I kind of met Joe Silva, who would eventually become the matchmaker to the UFC, in how I got into the UFC. I actually ended up fighting an event in '97. It was the first MMA event in Australia called the Australasian Ballet Judo Open. Originally, it was touted as the Australasian UFC until the UFC actually took legal action against them, and they had to change the name. But the event at the time when it ran live was the Australasian UFC. It wasn't until they released the video later that they rebranded and called the Australian Cage Combat Championships. So, that got my foot in the door in '97. And I actually, Pirelli actually reached out to me at one point about coming into the UFC after that show. But at the time, the expense of flights and flying me over just was too expensive. And so that didn't happen. So I might have been in the UFC earlier had air travel been a little bit more affordable. I even met Bas Rutten, I think, somewhere in the 98, 99 era. When he came to Australia, he was brought out by Larry Papadopoulos, who was fighting in Judo and Pancras. And he actually hooked me up with a promoter in Holland over there, because they were, again, interested in getting me out because he thought I was had some talent and I would be exciting on their shows over there. But once again, the cost of flights was a little bit prohibitive to getting me out into overseas. Sorry, I kind of dragged that on. There was a lot in there, but as you can imagine, there's a lot to unpack from that time.
My man, that's exactly why we have you here, sir. Like, honestly, that's exactly why you have us here, to educate everybody on these points and these topics. And we want to know. That's what we want to know. We want to know all these points of history because unfortunate news that came out today, UFC pioneer Art Jimerson passed away, right? So the creators of the sport, they're not going to be around forever, but hopefully these recordings will, right? And we want to know these stories because I'm the only guy on this panel besides you that was involved around the sport through those 90s eras. I was the fan reading the magazines, keeping up with the sports through the magazines.
Even though I was fighting in that era, I was a fan too. I think I used to refer to myself as the world's toughest nerd because I worked in IT and I was fighting in the UFC, and I just considered myself a fan that got lucky and got the opportunity to fight in something that they were a fan of.
Yeah, hey, Joe Rogan uses a term all the time called the nerd assassin. You were the original nerd assassin then.
Absolutely, and it's kind of funny because when the original UFC video came out on the PS2 and I think the GameCube back then, because I was an IT nerd, the guys who actually developed the game made sure to put me in it. Not only was I in the game, I was in the actual manual that came with it. So they had little photographs and information and special moves. So I was included in that simply because I was the IT guy, and they were kind of like, yeah, got to have you in there.
You have to have a copy of that still, right?
They actually created a secret move that was a spinning back kick that if you pulled it off in the game was almost a guaranteed knockout, which was pretty funny. But though that disappeared in later versions of the game.
Following up Ricky's question, do you have a copy of that vintage game? Do you ever still see it?
Yeah, I actually do have. I have the original PS2 and GameCube. I don't have a GameCube, but I have a PS2 at home, and I think I've got a Xbox copy and one of the original Xboxes at home, which thankfully I picked up both through working with the gaming companies and promoting the game back in the day. So I got a copy of those games. I haven't seen it in years. I've got some of their highlights of like my entrance into the UFC, into the UFC game, and little video clips and snippets and stuff like that, which is pretty cool to look back on. But no, I haven't touched the game in probably 10 years or so.
Makes sense. Now, self-fan confession. I used to play as your character, and I triangle choked every other single character about 2,000 times. It was a very fun game, and that the UFC game back then and still to this day is a great way for a lot of people to get involved with the sport and or appreciate the fighters, learn fighters, just in general enjoy the sport in a non-traditional sport, esport way as they call it nowadays. Um, do you ever play the new one?
No, sadly, I'm not a very big gamer. I don't have a game at home. I've spent too much time with running my business and doing lots of extracurricular activities and looking after my kids. Though now as my kids are starting to get a little bit older, they're probably going to, in a couple of years, be old enough to get a video game console. So I'll make sure I pull out the old PS2 and hopefully it still works. So they can play with Dad's character, and we'll definitely grab the new versions of the game and have a play of them as well.
That sounds beautiful. Now you touched on it. We got to address it. We talked about your way into the UFC and overall the MMA scene was a long, windy road that wasn't real clear. Training was, you had to puzzle piece it together, learn this from that guy and make it your own. But here you are, different stage of life, the full package. You're delivering it. King's Academy, Australia. Tell us about it, sir.
Well, yeah, as you said, back in the day, it was a learning experience. Like, I kind of tell people, back in the day, I had to have something like half a dozen to a dozen different gym memberships. Like, I had a boxing gym membership. Because I did shift work, I had to actually have multiple memberships because I had classes, depending on what shift I worked. If I was working morning or evening shift, I had to go to different classes. So, I used to have 2 Muay Thai club memberships, 2 jiu-jitsu club memberships, a couple of wrestling club memberships, gym memberships. And I had to travel literally all around Sydney. And, sometimes the travel to and from training was like, half an hour to an hour each way just to go to training. And then it was kind of up to me to kind of put the skills together. I had a good coach back in the day, Anthony Lange, who, helped. He did a little bit of MMA, and so kind of worked with me a bit. But even then, it was, as I said, it was so new. So a lot of what we were doing was evolving and developing and trying different things. Even the strength and conditioning and functional training didn't really exist. I think MMA was really one of the sports that really developed, functional training using resistance training for more specific kind of combination skill and strength-based conditioning. So it was an amazing time, and it really opened up my eyes to a lot of the stuff. And as you said, now I have King's Academy, and I'm one of the few gyms in Australia that still has everything in one place. Like we have, as you can see behind me, the boxing ring, and if you look down the back, we've got a cage behind me over there as well. We've got a massive mat space. We've got bags. I have a sauna. I have a gym in the corner. Hyperbaric oxygen chamber, yoga room. We teach boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and then we have MMA specific classes. So I'm trying to provide everything in one place that I previously had to go all around Sydney to try and get. And, I try and make it as affordable as possible. Naturally, I run a business and it has to be successful, so I can't do it free or too cheap, but I try and keep it, I think, as reasonable as possible, considering that everything, we offer along with it at no extra cost. And I do know we have the best family rates in probably Australia. I definitely know in Sydney, because we think it's important for families to get involved. I think it's a great activity for families to do together. We have kids classes, teens classes, adult classes. And we have, even for the jiu-jitsu and the Muay Thai, we have structured learning plans, syllabuses, schedules. So nothing's, put the chance. We know ahead of time what we're teaching. The classes are very consistent in the way we teach and what we teach. And we have some very skilled and high-level coaches here. So, I think I'm blessed to be able to do this, that, I got involved into a sport that I was a fan of. I got to participate in the sport for many years. Even for a while there, I worked for almost 5 years at Fox Sports talking about the sport. So even that opportunity was absolutely amazing. And then being able to, at the same time, run a gym and bring these skills to other people, because I think they've been invaluable. A lot of the stuff I've learned in the mat and in the ring, and I apply to everyday life, and it's really helped my life. And in the same vein, I've seen lots of students come in and gain a lot of those skills and help them, not just inside competition or in the gym and training, but at school, at home, and at work. So, look, I think it's amazing, and as much as I do it as a business to survive, because everyone has to have a job to kind of make money, I do it because I love what I do, and I love seeing the results that we're able to achieve through our training.
Sir, I love that story. I love the explanation. I want to say from fans, from all of us, like literally everyone, like not only did you contribute to the sport on your own personal level, but you still contribute to the sport in a collective way. And you took your knowledge, your experience, your selfless actions of pushing forward and going all these different routes, having 6-8 different club memberships. I believe it. I've heard other pioneers say the same thing. So for you to see the need in the community, the benefit of it, and being able to bring it together at this point, at this level, in a complete package to give genuinely the new generation something you didn't have, man, right on. Like seriously, right on. Now, I'm not going to go on any further. I'm going to give the next question to Sean.
Hey, yeah, Mr. Sinosic, thanks for coming on the podcast today. I just wanted to say I was really interested in you talking about fighting and working at the same time. I know today's game has evolved a lot, and there's still a lot of fighters who work at the same time, even fighters in their early stages of the UFC careers. What advice do you have to guys competing and fighting now in martial arts or mixed martial arts, kickboxing, anything, jiu-jitsu?
Look, I think the greatest thing that created success for me is routine. Really creating routines and habits. It's not easy, turning up to training after a hard day when you're tired, exhausted. You've got other things on your mind, whether it's personal things with relationships or what's going on at work or the weather. There's always a reason not to train. There's always a reason not to turn up. And it's very easy to fall to that. And I still tell this to people to the day. You want to create routines and habits so that you don't even think about it. I get up in the morning, even now I do it. I have routines. I follow steps and procedures. I do things. Now, obviously, they've changed. Now with kids, I've got to put in kids into my routine. But I still do, certain things. And I make sure I do it every day because I don't think about it. I just follow the routine, the habits. Same as coming to the gym and teaching and working and running my classes. I create habits and routines so I don't think about it. And that's what you should be doing when you want to be successful, you want to be good at something, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whether it's Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, MMA, it doesn't matter. You want to create good habits, good routines, you want to stick to them. You want to turn up even when you don't feel like it. The one thing I've always seen when I ask people is, did you want to come today? How did you feel? No, I was tired, this, that at work.
Right.
Now the class is over. How do you feel? And not a single person has ever regretted coming to training because they all say, I feel so much better. I'm so glad I turned up. They're exhausted. They're sweaty. They're tired. And they're going, you know what? I feel so good. The stress is gone. I'm wrecked, but I'll see you tomorrow. And, and that's a great feeling to see that people get that. And it's the same way I used to feel when I was training. I would do things like I didn't have, classes. My gym wasn't open 7 days a week like we are here. They didn't have, early morning, daytime, evening classes. They had just a couple of evening classes and that's it. And thankfully, my coach at the time gave me a key to the gym. So I used to go home. I used to go to the gym on some nights. Like I would work in the afternoon. I'd go home. I'd do stuff. I'd teach. I'd do whatever I'd have to. And then I'd go to the gym and I'd open up when it was closed and everyone's at home. And I'd go there and do my own training for a couple of hours. I just, whatever, hit the bag. I'd do individual drills. We had kind of like a wrestling dummy drill. Whatever I could do, I just trained. And, there was many times I didn't feel like it, but I always felt good afterwards. I used to do security and sometimes I would work security and I'd be finishing at 1 or 2 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'd drive to the gym. Because I knew I was going to sleep in the next day, so I thought I'd do an hour or so of training, then I'd go home, go to bed, sleep in the next day, and then just get ready for work again. You know, you've got to be passionate about it. You've got to do things that you don't feel like you don't want to do. You just got to make yourself, and I'll tell you, you never regret it. And I guess the greatest feeling and demonstration that it's worth it is the results that you achieve in competition and the success that comes on the mat and in the ring and in the cage. You know, you put in the hard work, you see the results. You don't put in the hard work, the results will eventually disappear. You've got a lot of natural, gifted athletes out there that do very well early on, succeed, but they don't have the work ethic, and they eventually disappear. But you see the guys who put in the hard yards and then work and work and work, regardless of how gifted they are, and they have success. I've got some guys in the gym at the moment. They're not, you know, some of them are very gifted. They work their asses off, and some not so gifted, and they work even harder. And, you know, and they're still seeing amazing results because they put in the work. They make the effort. They're always pushing themselves and looking to learn. And again, it brings up another saying that I always say is when you stop learning, you stop living. You're basically, if you're not learning, you're dying. So even I'm always pushing myself to learn new things. You know, I'm always looking at the latest jiu-jitsu or MMA things. I'm looking at what's happening outside in the community and looking to add it into what we're doing here. You know, I also do it in other areas such as nutrition and politics. And I'm always looking to expand my mind and keep my brain working and functional along with my body. I think it's important to have that balance between mind and body fitness.
I appreciate that answer very much. You killed it right there, sir. I know there's a part of this though that segues right into a question Ricky had for you, because you talked about obviously giving one, you're still the love for jiu-jitsu, looking at what's going on out there, and you talked earlier about youth martial arts, and not just youth martial arts, but family orientated martial arts. We had a UFC fighter on our show recently, Garrett Armfield, talking about the importance and the impact of martial arts on him and his family early on. So to Ricky about jiu-jitsu and you know that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if you're in the passionate about learning, jujitsu is gonna be never ending, right? There's always some new kid, some new ace, some new jujitsu stud that has a new way to pass guard, a new way to take the back, some other creative way to do things that it's just always mind blowing. New submissions, new techniques. There's where I'm at, I have a 7-year-old son. He's been training at 10th Planet out here in Austin. And just the kids I see today, there's some 10-year-olds that are doing things, creating their own submissions, calling their own names to certain submissions, where I'm just like, you're 10 years old. How is this happening? What's been your kind of view and outlook on how that is happening, how that's changed specifically in the jiu-jitsu game? Because now we're seeing super fights, right? We're seeing guys be able to make money in jiu-jitsu. We've seen the top of the top dogs like Gordon Ryan and Craig Jones say, why would I ever do MMA? I have a full life and a successful career in jiu-jitsu. It's no longer one thing that we do to lead us to that path. Instead, we're creating a career just solely off of jiu-jitsu. What do you think of the landscape on how that's changing?
Look, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I probably should have warned you earlier that once I start talking, I really keep going.
That's right, King. Let it go.
Sometimes. Hope you guys appreciate that. But no, you're right. Like, the sport has evolved so much. Like, as mentioned at the start, I was a pioneer in MMA here in Australia, but not just MMA, jiu-jitsu. You know, I competed in the first ever Pan Pacs in Australia. I won the first absolute division Pan Pacs jiu-jitsu competition. I was the first Australian to compete in the ADCC World Championships in 1998, their inaugural event. I was the first athlete in ADCC history to do a heel hook or win with a heel hook submission in ADCC. Back in the day, I kind of started introducing leg locks into my game because I felt it was such an underutilized area. And it's funny because in jiu-jitsu at the time, leg locks was pretty much frowned upon. And I had this nickname called leg humper, like, you know, the way dogs hump legs, because I used to gravitate towards people's legs to submit them, and they'd make fun of me. And my answer was always the same. Did you tap?
Yeah. Yeah. Now you
Yes.
can't be. You can't be at the top of the game anymore in jiu-jitsu if you're not good when it comes to leg attack.
It's kind of sad because at the time I kind of was gravitating toward it, and I was starting to experiment with different leg locking techniques and stuff. And I mainly did it because I was planning to add it to the MMA game, because back then it wasn't permissible in any sort of grappling event other than ADCC. And after 97, I kind of didn't get any opportunities for nearly 3 years to be able to fight again. Also, about 2 and a bit years to fight again. So I kind of stopped that progress on leg locks and focused on the upper body skills. That's why I became so well known with triangles and arm bars. And I did the first Goga Plata in MMA in rings back in '98, and obviously the Dead Elvis, which is now known by another name, the Dead Orchard.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
We were kind of experimenting back then. But the beauty of what's happening now is we've introduced this sport across the world. Back then, it's kind of interesting how we look at it. Jiu-jitsu is pretty much what gave us MMA. It was the Gracies going out there and doing challenges, and them coming to the US and kind of created, even though it was still happening in Japan and there was rings, and it really wasn't very big. It was still very much a niche sport. What really made it blow up was jiu-jitsu, in the UFC. And it was crazy that we would see the UFC blow up into such a mainstream sport. And even, as I said, back in the day, you couldn't make a living off it. I had to have a full-time job. At one point, I had a full-time job, was running a gym and trying to fight professionally as well, because it just wasn't possible. But the sport eventually evolved to the point now where you can plan to have a full-time career. You can get to the point where you can make a living off MMA. But jiu-jitsu, which introduced it, kind of lagged behind it for quite a long time. And even though it's way more popular when it comes to training, like way more people do jiu-jitsu than do MMA, I think probably because just how difficult MMA is, it still didn't capture the viewer. And I think it was no-gi that really started to capture the viewer a lot more exciting, changing the rule sets to make it more exciting, to
submission-based,
more action, and the ability for the sport to have different sorts of rule sets so they could play around. So different promotions had different rule sets, so we could have a look at what created the best results, what created the best action for our competitors. So it took a little bit longer than MMA, but now we're seeing the fruits of those results. We're starting to see more events coming out, more professional events. Craig Jones just came up with one where, competitors will be paid. Obviously, he's trying to challenge the ADCC for their premier position. I think that's going to be very difficult to do because, it is considered the premium event out there. But at least they're out there doing it, offering, $1 million in prize money, giving opportunities to more grapplers. So as we see the sport continue to evolve and to become better, we're seeing kids, as you mentioned, we've got kids starting at 3 years old, I had a kid who started about 5 or 6 quite a few years ago. He's a teenager now. He was very shy, didn't participate with other people, didn't interact. And I just saw the sport, change him, bring him out. He flourished into, an amazing child, a competitor. He eventually became a junior world champion. He ended up being undefeated for 5 or 6 years under me, and I still think he's undefeated as a 16-year-old. He recently, won Blue Belt Worlds. I think he went down to Brazil, won the Pan Brazils down there. Seeing kids that you produced, achieve these sort of results is, absolutely amazing. And like you mentioned earlier, we're seeing more and more kids get involved earlier. And because they're getting involved earlier, they're getting a better understanding, a greater feeling for it. So they're having the ability to, develop moves based on on their body types. I've always said jiu-jitsu is the physical application of your physical attributes. And so jiu-jitsu for everybody will be different for each individual. And that's one of the beauties of the sport, is that you can tailor it to whoever comes in. It doesn't matter short, tall, big, small, stocky, lanky. There is a skill set and ability to develop those skills. And it's one of the things I try and do in my gym. I don't just focus on the skills that I'm good at. I try and push myself and to teach skills that I really would never use or I'm not good at, but I try and introduce them to my students so they can discover skill sets that would be applicable to their game. And it's that old Bruce Lee adage, take what's useful, disregard what's not. And jiu-jitsu really is that. Even though there's a massive amount of skills and different techniques and abilities out there, you don't need to be good at them, but there is a set of skills that you can take and apply to yourself that will allow you to be successful. And that's why it doesn't matter whether you're 3 years old or 63 years old, you can do jiu-jitsu, you can learn the skills, you have the ability to keep doing it for a lifetime. It's why I'm still involved. I've been involved in it for, I'm guessing, getting to in that 30-year mark. I've been doing the sport. As I said, still learning new things, still adding new stuff to what we teach and how we do it. And we're only going to see that continue to evolve and change, and new things come into the sport. I remember Higa Machado many, many years teaching a guard, which he called inverted guard. And he was saying, watch, one day everyone will be doing this. And a lot of the people were like, nah, this is crazy. Why would you be upside down? And then literally a couple of years later, everyone at the World Championships is inverting and playing jiu-jitsu upside down, and kind of look back and go, wow, he could see what was coming way ahead before we even did. And, and we're going to continue to see that happen. And, even now, like for years, I've evolved my own techniques and created my own moves. Now, that doesn't mean no one else has done it. There are people out there creating moves that you never see, who never get on YouTube, who maybe aren't competing all the time, but they're out there evolving, creating new moves. And it's one of the things that made me feel good about what I'm doing is when I've created or evolved moves, seeing someone else do it, and whether they come out with an instructional or not, but seeing that I was on the right track and that it's doing the right things. And it was several years ago when John Danaher first came to Australia. I had a fairly long chat with him. We spent a bit of time together talking. And it was interesting that we both came from different ends, but arrived kind of in the same junction. He came from a philosophical background and started implementing structure and strategy and things like that. I came from an IT background, which is very structural, which looks at repetition, creating routine, and then getting towards a philosophical understanding, concepts and principles, and applying it to different areas. And then how we kind of came to the same idea that it's a balance of structured routine and mechanics, along with philosophy, concepts, and ideas that we apply in both directions. So as the sport evolves, I think people coming from the West are going to continue to evolve further because we do have that structured background in the way we learn at school and teach, and we progress. We set goals, short-term goals, long-term goals. We have targets and aims and things like that. And then whereas, back in the day with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was very free-flowing, very freestyle. You would get a belt when you could tap out someone of a higher belt consistently and things like that. And then adding curriculums and syllabuses and structure and kind of finding a balance between those two kind of extremes and worlds. And it's great to be involved with that. It's great to see it happening. As I said, I have kids who've done fantastic things and still are doing great things. I've got a junior with me now Same thing, became a junior world champion. Came up through my ranks, competing in highly successful junior competitors, like 17 now, he's a blue belt. Competes in jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, Muay Thai, MMA.
Yeah.
Ridiculously skilled. He's now a trainee at the gym, so he's working here. I've had a few students over the years, same thing. They started in the kids class, went to the teens class, went to the adults class, started working for us, started becoming competitors and things like that. So it's great to see, and I know I'm not the only one doing this. I know there are many gyms around, not just Australia but the world, doing the same thing, seeing kids progress and coming through the ranks and developing and becoming, successful and talented at what they do. And again, that underlying factor that they all share is hard work and dedication.
Yep, you can't progress without it, right?
I think I went on for ages on that one.
No, it's good. It's all great stuff. And what I was gonna say is, like, these blue belts, as a 16, 17-year-old blue belts, I almost feel bad for the adult blue belts who got into their 20s. I see a lot of these, like you said, everybody has a promotion now. Everybody's got some type of promotion that's trying to do these super fights and just matching up belt ranks. And I see these, 26, 28, 29-year-old blue belt that have been training for a year, and they're going against a 17-year-old blue belt. And it's like, he might have 10 years under his belt. Of course, a lot of it coming as a child, but it's a second language to him. He's speaking a different language that you have no chance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because the guys that have been doing it for so long, like you said, they're a blue belt, but they've been at it for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
So they have a natural feel for it. Even though they learn, they've been in there for so long, it's natural. It's like a second language to them. Jiu-jitsu is just another language they speak. They just speak with their body instead of their mouth. But saying that, like, I have an adult white belt who's come in to the gym who's ridiculously talented. He picks up stuff really well. He's a big boy, but super explosive, very strong and extremely flexible. And he's a nightmare for all my senior belts. Like, he's a white belt. Like, he's not far off blue belt, On competition results, I could probably give him one now. Like, he wins pretty much everything he enters in his weight class in absolute. But I think he still needs to develop more skills, but he's such a natural. And he's as good as some of the younger kids who've been doing it for 10 years. It's crazy. Like, everyone's different, and people learn at different rates and pick up things. And as I said, the one underlying common factor is hard work. He works hard. He's always thinking about jiu-jitsu. He's watching YouTube videos. If he's out of town for work, he finds another gym and he goes there and trains. And again, it just depends how much you want it and how much you're willing to put into it. And again, that's the big difference.
It's always the big difference. The effort, the dedication, it's always the big difference. Sean, did you have a question you wanted to go with?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, you were talking about things evolving, the sport evolving. I just want to say styles evolving as well, not just in martial arts, but your style. You used to go with the red hair, the goatee, and I just wanted to say I was a huge fan of it. You were a pioneer in the hair dyeing. Do you think creativity in fighters is a big part of the game still? Do you think it's important to be creative, to embrace that coming out? And do you think it helps you, or looking back on it, are you proud of the style choices you made in the past?
Oh, look, it's kind of interesting. It's because what it really revolved around was creating routines and habits. So when I was younger, when I started competing, what I started doing when I had big events, I used to bleach my hair. And that was just part of the mental process of mentally preparing myself for what was coming up. So I had a particular song I would listen to, and every time I was driving and training, I'd play that song, which would put me into my frame of mind. And then when competitions were coming up, I would just bleach my hair. And it was just about creating a mindset. So even though I was doing this individual stuff, it was never about standing out or being different. It was just about doing something different from my day-to-day life that put me in the mindset to be as prepared as possible to compete. So psychology was one of the things I kind of was looking at back in the day as well. And I think that's sometimes we kind of overlook the psychology of fighting, and you don't hear about it until fighters start having problems that they start going to psychologists and stuff like that. Whereas I realized early on the psychology was just as important as the physicality, and that bleaching my hair and doing that sort of stuff was just part of it. Now, the reason I went for different colored hair was because when I came to the UFC, there was already a famous fighter that used to bleach his hair. And annoyingly, he was in my weight division. And I ended up facing him for the world title belt, Tito Ortiz.
Yeah.
So when I first got to the UFC,
No, just kidding.
I'm like, well, I don't want to look like a copycat. So even though when I was doing jiu-jitsu, I used to bleach my hair as a competition preparation, I didn't want to go in there going into the same division as this guy, because then people are like, oh, he's just copying Tito. So when I first went into the UFC, I just shaved my head. I never shaved my head before. I'm like, all right, I have to do something because I have this routine that I do, but I can't bleach my hair, so I shaved my head. And then once Tito left the UFC for a while, and I fought Forrest, I ended up bleaching it again because he was no longer there, and I could go back to what I originally did. But that's why with Renato Sobral, I went, even though my hairdresser screwed it up royally, it was meant to be green and gold lightning bolts, obviously to represent Australia. And then with Alessio Sakara, I went the bright fire engine, red hair, just for something different. And that again kind of worked against me because the dye was a little bit too fresh. So in my fight against him, I started bleeding, but I was sweating so much, my dye was also leaking, so it actually made the blood look worse. I'm like, oh, I'll learn that lesson the hard way. So it's kind of funny how I kind of did it. But in hindsight, when I look back, I think it's very important to create that individuality, whatever it is, on how you do it. I know different fighters do different ways. Some do it with dance routines, some do it with haircuts, and now that the UFC is once again allowing fighters to be a little bit more creative with their clothing and things like that, so you can kind of separate yourself from the crowd. Because let's be honest, one of the things that attracts us to the sport is the fighters and supporting individual fighters. And once you get really into the sport, you don't just support a fighter because they win. You support a fighter because you have a connection with them.
Yep.
And knowing about that fighter and recognizing that fighter and knowing who they are, it's very similar to the WWE, which back in my day was a WWF before they got sued.
Oh yeah.
It was just male soap opera. That's really what it was. The WWE was just a soap opera for men that was based around fighting, because we have that primal instinct to fight. We want to watch fighting, but to get a connection, we had to see a story and understand what was going on. And that's why that sort of fighting became popular. And it's part of the reason UFC also got popular, because people got behind certain fighters. And, whether it was Hoist Gracie you wanted to support, or Dan Severn because you like wrestlers, or Ken Shamrock because, you like his style, and whatever, Marco Ruas, all these different guys, they all had different styles and they were different, and people would get behind the fighter regardless of the result. And for a little while, that kind of disappeared as individuality in the sport kind of disappeared. I think one of the saddest things that they got rid of was the ramp. That was one of the greatest experiences for myself, was going down the ramp to the title fight when I fought Tito. He had his fireworks going on in the background as he went down. I had my laser show, and I had this big throne on the stage that I sat on, and tried to get them to give me the throne and send it back to Australia, but they refused. So a little bit disappointed in that. But again, it was an amazing experience. But what it also did, it really amped up the crowd. Like when the main event came and the ramp lit up, and then whether it was fireworks or lightning or whatever it was, the video montage of the fighter that was coming out, the crowd got excited. The place just filled with energy. And it was such a great experience. And people supported the fighters because, they had that connection. And I think you need a certain amount of individuality. You need to find your place of difference, not just in skill set or the way you fight or perform in the ring or cage, but who you are as a person. You need to let the world know who you are. And I think social media helps with that as well, because you get to send out your message. And I think the UFC recognize that, because they do give bonuses for social media or interaction and things like that. The question is are you doing it because you're trying to show people who you are, or are you just trying to get more followers by being
you got to be organic.
What's important is letting the world know who you are, so they can connect with you and want to follow you and follow your career and know what's going on, because they have that connection. And, it's good to see that slowly starting to come out more again in the UFC.
Definitely, man. And you nailed it, man. It's about the fighters connecting, or vice versa, the fans connecting as well. There's a mutual exchange that must take place, or the fighter, I hate to say it, there's many fighters that have just been lost into the ebbs of time. I bring up the pioneer era as often as I can to my friends and peers or whoever wants to listen. And a lot of times I go, XYZ fighter, and they go, who? And I gotta go, well, he fought this guy and this guy and this guy, and they're like, oh, okay, kinda. And like you said, it's because there was never that real connection. Now,
it's one of the things that I used to do back in the day. It's like anytime there was an event, I always made sure that during fight week, I was out in the hotel and in the lobby and meeting and talking to people. I never hid myself away. Again, because I was as much as a fan, I would, also go up to the fighters. You've seen my photos. You've seen all my photos with the other fighters. I used to get the photos with them as much as the fans used to. And because I appreciated it so much, and it was so much easier for me, because as a fighter, they were always happy to get photos with me. I understood that feeling of like what it's like to get that opportunity. So I always made sure I presented that opportunity to fans. Always made sure I was in the lobby in fight week. And then after my fight, if I wasn't sent to hospital to get stitched up, I was always in the crowd. I would always head into the stadium. And even if I didn't have a seat, I'd just be walking around and talking to people and hanging out and taking photos and watching the fights and sitting down with the fans. But I think that's important. I think that a little bit gets lost today. I think a lot of the fighters don't put themselves out quite as much. I know there are some that still do, and you can tell by their popularity how they do. But I think the more you interact with the fans, the greater your fan base is, the more they connect with you, and I guess the more success you're going to have, and the more the promotion's going to have you fight. I really don't have the best fight record in the UFC. For a couple of reasons. One, they always threw me up against the hardest guy because of how much it cost to fly me out to any of these events. They didn't want to build me up back in the day. They didn't have the money to slowly progress my career and build me up with guys of a similar level. They just threw me in the deep end. The number of world champions, past or future world champions that I faced is crazy. It's probably more than half my record.
That's so interesting. I never even thought about that, because when you go through your record, you fought, the who's who of MMA legends. You fought them all. And I never once thought it was because of the amount of money they were having to bring you over. That never crossed my mind. That's fascinating.
Had to make it viable. But also part of the reason they did that, I'm lucky. When I say I'm fairly well-spoken, I'm well-educated, I can speak well, I understand what's going on, and I was in an era of the sport where the media was trying to vilify the sport. They were trying to bring it down. They were trying to make it look barbaric. And because I was well-spoken, I understood what they were trying to achieve. I understood what the UFC was trying to achieve by legitimizing it as a sport. They used to always throw me to the media. So I got to speak to them and try and set the record straight. To the point that sometimes I would be with a group of fighters and and they would ask a question, and they'd go, we'd like to ask that, Elvis, you don't jump in first. Let some of the other guys answer before you do. Because they knew I would never give them the answer they wanted. And the UFC brought me back because I understood the sport. I was well-spoken, but I also interacted with the fans. I mean, one of the things I used to do, I used to hang out in the Zuffa office with the admin staff and talk to them. I knew all the admin staff. I know Josh Hedges, the photographer. I'm not sure if I think he's still with the UFC. He may have retired recently. But I spent years. I was a photographer as well. I used to chat to Josh Hedges about his equipment and stuff like that. Make fun of him because he shot with Canon. I was a Nikon user. And I'm proud to say that now that Josh is a Nikon user because they got him on board. So, hey, that's my little come on. But yeah, I used to, as I said, used to speak to Joe Silva, the matchmaker in the room. People don't realize just how well-versed he was in all MMA. He understood back in the day. He used to watch all the hook and shoots. He'd watch the Shudo events, the Pancras, the rings. He knew the Japanese, the American. He even looked at European and Brazilian events. We used to talk about a lot of this stuff because he was a massive fan. And people don't understand that a lot of times the matches that didn't happen because he didn't think they were good or he didn't want them. It happened because of managers and negotiations and things falling through. But when it came to it, like, he was always looking for the best, most exciting matches and the way to progress people through the sport. But yeah, get back into my original point. I spent a lot of time in the office, in the foyers, in the lobby, talking to the staff, to the fans, to even just the hotel staff and educating them because they didn't know what was going on. You know, I'd talk to anyone about the sport and I'd be there all the time. And I think the UFC saw that passion. They saw my ability to share my knowledge and understanding of it as well. And again, it's a big part of the reason I came back, along with the fact the way I fight. I never fought not to lose. You see a lot of fighters, particularly those moving up in the ranks, they fight not to lose. I always fought to win. My goal was to win. I always went out on my shield. I came out back on my shield, win or lose. I always put it on the line. I never stopped fighting from the start to the end of the fight. I think in the Sakara fight, I took a beating for 15 minutes. And at literally the last couple of, the last 15, 20 seconds, I hit a knee bar on him. And he only got out of it because he grabbed the cage, stood up, and pulled himself out of it. But I was always going for that last second. I didn't care, you know, how much diversity I faced during the match. It was always, I want to go out with a win. It was never about not losing. And again, that screwed my record a little bit because I always put it on the line. I went out. Sometimes I went out as a winner. Sometimes I went out as a loser. I mean, I guess one way to look at it is every single one of my victories was a submission or knockout or TKO victory. I don't have any decision victories, but I do have a lot of decision losses.
That's a beautiful thing to say. Having 100% finishing rate is not easy, especially, I mean, if you have more than one fight, it becomes exponentially not easy, and you had plenty more than that. I just want to say, go back to something you talked about earlier. You're being a fan, you engaging, you being out there, capturing the moment, getting those memories on film, on camera, whatever's. I got to tell you, thank you, because that's how you and I connected, right? Like, a lot of people know my post whatever's, and you started sharing some of your pictures, and then it started going and going and going. And I got to say, I'm going to flat out endorse Mr. Elvis Sinosic has, like, maybe, probably, almost guarantee the best camera roll in all of UFC history. Like, I can literally, every single time I put up a "do you know who this is?" this guy not only has the answer, but he has a picture with that guy. Like, I literally have not been able to beat Mr. Sinosic not once in literally 150, maybe 200 tries. So
I'm
thank
sure
you for
there's
that.
a couple I've missed out there. I'm not perfect. I didn't get to meet every single fighter out there. But every opportunity I got to meet a fighter, I did. I like sitting down and talking to them and getting to know them as much as possible. And that includes my opponents. I think that was one of the things I struggled with early on is I'd be matched up against opponents and I'd be friendly to them. And they just didn't understand why I wasn't angry at them, why I wasn't being aggressive. Like I was like, hey, how you going? Big fan. Looking forward to our fight, blah, blah, blah. Like Frank Shamrock came up, like he wouldn't even talk to me or shake my hand before the fight. I mean, he did, but it was very like he just didn't want to interact with me. He had to have a negative. Because I spoke to him afterwards, we became best friends. The same with Forrest. Forrest was a little bit different. He was much friendlier before our fight, and we kept the friendship afterwards. Tito was interesting. Anytime we were on camera, he was the Tito we know. Selling himself and creating a controversy and being extreme. But in the back rooms, he was actually really cool to hang out. When we were doing the photo shoot, we were trying to make each other laugh on camera. So, it is pretty cool. And as you said, I'm a fanboy that got to be punched in the face by some of my fans, and I got the opportunity to punch some of my people that I looked up to in the face. So, it's kind of how I look at it. That's why I have so many photos, and I can look back on those. Honestly, I lost a lot of photos because back then it wasn't digital. A lot of them were taken on film cameras, and I didn't get to. I lost a lot of the prints and stuff, and I never got to scan them in and stuff. So I probably have way more. I probably had way more than I still have now. The ones I have now are the ones I've managed to download or scan or save off magazines. Like my Frank Shamrock fight photos that I have came from a Japanese magazine that was sent to me after the fight from a fan. But I don't know where the magazine is anymore, but I have the scans of it and stuff. So, I have a massive collection of photos with fighters. As I said, I'm a fan, world's toughest fan. Just, I love the sport, and I feel that it's an honor to be able to be on both sides as a fan, both in the cage and outside the cage.
I think this is a perfect time for a gift that Ricky sends to me quite often. The one of us, one of us, one of us. And I appreciate that so much, dude. Now I'm gonna just turn this to anybody who's listening to this now, later in the future. If you have pictures of Mr. Elvis Sinosic in combat, fighting anybody, anywhere on planet Earth, you got some of those records. Hit him up on his socials. We'll have it. We'll add it into the screen later. But hey, hit him up. Give it to him. Help share in the memories, because all of you people from the 90s, some of us who was kids in the 90s, we know what that's like. Like roll your camera and snap it and you lose the film, or the sun gets to it, or the dog gets in it, or ocean gets to it. I just can keep going and going and going. But another thing that's digital format, something you got to do kind of recently last year, was they did an episode on UFC Fight Pass. Where are they now with you? I want to get into just simply, how was that experience and how did that come about?
Well, it's kind of funny. I actually I hit them up. Let me think. It was about, I think, late 2019. I think it was around late 2019.
Pass the keys.
One of my coaches just came in.
All good.
Around late 2019, I hit him up and I'm like, hey guys, you've got this show. Where are they now? I'd be interested in being involved. Would you guys be interested in having me on the show? And they were actually pretty keen. They started talking about it. And then something happened known as COVID, which kind of blew that out of the water. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, I think it was around 21. I'm trying to think. So my daughter was born. Yeah, so it was around late 21. I think they started talking about new episodes, and I hit them up again, and they're like, "Yeah, we want to get out." Oh no, sorry, I hit them up. I think early 21. It wasn't until late 21 that they actually came out to my place and started filming, because I know the dates because my wife was pregnant with my second child coming on the way, and obviously in the videos. But when I hit them up, she didn't even exist. She wasn't even a thought at the time. But it just took them that long to kind of get organised and get out and organise a film crew. So they came out to Australia, filmed a lot of stuff out here, which was an awesome experience. Got to talk a lot about what I'm doing now. Obviously, I gave them way more information that was able to be put on the show, and they actually took out my call out, and it's like where I said, Dana, put me in the Hall of Fame, Pioneer Hall of Fame. I want to be in there. Come on, give me some credit. They cut that out. But yeah,
we won't.
And I think over that period, while they were filming a lot of other episodes, it still took another year and a bit before they actually released it, because it only came out this year, I believe, even though it was filmed back in early 21.
Fair enough, man. I appreciate that story. And just for clarification, we won't cut that out. As a matter of fact, we will probably just put that as a permanent clip and just constantly send it until it happens. I get the privilege of living in Vegas. I get to go to the Hall of Fame ceremonies every time they have an induction. So it would be a flipping honor when they call your name, because it's going to happen. We'll campaign for it. And you'll be there. I'll be there. And it'll be a great time.
Well, I know Dana hasn't forgotten me. Like, he still brings me up when he talks about fighters from different countries, building the sport in their country. He always mentions me when it comes to Australia. He hasn't forgotten me. As I said, back in the early days, I met Dana, I was on the very first show that Zuffa came on board. So, as I said, I used to hang out in the room with the admin staff, and Dana was one of the guys I used to hang out and chat with, and he was really cool and down to earth. And ever since then, I've always had a great relationship with him. He's always been really good to me. I love the work he's done with the UFC. He's been controversial at times, but you can't deny he's brought to the sport to the point where it is now, one of the most popular sports, one of the most watched sports in the world. He's done a fantastic job. As I said, he hasn't forgotten me. He still brings me up. I've just got to get into that Hall of Fame. So hopefully in time it's going to happen.
I believe it's going to happen. And actually, I've heard that similar sentiment from a few fighters from, I'll say, the Pioneer era, the original days. And he tends to not forget. He does remember. He does take care of the people. And once again, I'm pretty sure you're going to get there. Now, I know Sean has
Sorry, I hate to cut you. I'm still lucky. I mean, thanks to the UFC, I've got to give them credit. I've not missed a single UFC event in Australia. I've been to every single event that has occurred in Australia. The UFC have always comped me tickets and given me tickets to the show, and I always get great seats. The only time they didn't give me tickets was pretty much during my era where I was working at Fox Sports, and that's because Fox Sports were providing the tickets. And I want to give UFC a big thumbs up. They do remember the pioneers, and they do still look after me, and hopefully they'll continue looking after me at the future events, because again, I still like to go to the events. I still love watching the fights, and I love hanging out and chatting to the fans as well. So if I go to another Australian event and you're there, keep an eye out. Feel free to come up and say hello. I'm always going to be there.
That's right. Been there from the jump. He's going to still be there. You know his face. You know his name. Now, talking about his name, though, my boy Sean, he's got a question for you.
Yeah, the King of Rock and Rumble, Elvis. I just had the question to start. Was your name brought on by the King of Rock and Roll? Were your parents Elvis fans? I just want to know about the origin of your name, and then taking on the play on words that you went with the name.
Well, my name came from obviously my parents. It wasn't. They didn't know who Elvis Presley was. They actually found out after I was born that people started talking about it. Funnily enough, they bought an Elvis record. We only ever had one Elvis record in the house, and it was only because someone said that I had the same name, so they bought it in the store. It's just a coincidence. It's not a common name, but it's not an uncommon name in Croatia or Baltic region. You'll find a lot of well, not a lot, but a lot of the Elvises that you meet will tend to be from that region, whether Croatian or Serbian, that sort of thing. So the name is just a coincidence. And as you can tell, the King of Rock and Rumble is a play on words of the King of Rock and Roll. And as with nicknames, unlike everyone knows, you don't make up your own nickname. I can't give myself a nickname. I think it sounds lame when a fighter tries to create their own nickname and try and brand it. I think the nicknames come from the fans, from the media, from the people watching. They're the ones that create the nicknames, and they're the ones that stick with you. And the King of Rock and Rumble came from my first time I fought in the Australasian UFC. One of the reporters used the name, the King of Rock and Rumble, in his article, and it pretty much stuck with me ever since. And that's the same with the finger point. That came from my first ever fight in the UFC. It's just it's become a trademark. So a lot of fighters, do this sort of thing in the photos, and I always had the finger point. And the reason is in my very first fight, I beat Jeremy Horn. It was predicted I would lose to him in under 3 minutes, and so I made it my goal to beat him in under 3 minutes. And I got the triangle armbar from the dead Elvis in 2 minutes and 59 seconds. So I was super pumped out there, and I'm sitting there waiting for the referee to raise my hand. And then I'm just looking around, looking at the crowd, and I look down, and there's a cameraman at my feet pointing up with a camera. So I just looked down the camera, kissed my finger, and pointed straight down the camera. And he recorded that. And then that was used in the promo for my fight with Tito Ortiz, and then ended up being the end of the UFC video game promo on the startup of the game. So they'd have all the montages, hands raised, and then at the very end, that finger point. So I kind of kept the finger point because, hey, I got lucky doing it at that event. And same with the name. It stuck with me ever since. And so I've always been known as the King of Rock and Rumble. I even got lucky. There was an Australian author, I'm having a mental blank. Robert G. Barrett. He wrote a book. He used to write Australian fiction books, and he actually wrote about the event, the first UFC event, which wasn't really a UFC event, in Australia. And he talked about it as one of his characters goes to the events and watched it. And all the characters were listed as the Queensland guy, the Brazilian guy, the Japanese guy, except for me. I was that guy called Elvis, the King of Rock and Rumble. So I think having that name was kind of a bit of a blessing, because it was a name that people kind of remember, and that play on words kind of stuck. And, it's nice. It's good to be the king.
Yeah. That's right. Hey, I love that story, and now that makes sense. I mean, I've seen you do it. I watched you do it, and it just was like, oh, that dude just has a cool signature move. I didn't know there was such a deep personal connection to that. Now, Mr. Sinosic, thank you so much. And this is basically the time where we say our thank yous. I say my thank you to you. I say thank you to the people watching now and later, and obviously to my co-host. But most importantly to you, and I'm sure you got some people you would like to thank. I'll do it your style.
Yeah, of course. Look, again, thank you to you guys for talking to me. I mean, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my history. This is one of the things, I'll show my kids one day so they can understand the sport and what I did, because I don't think I'm going to, well, actually, I probably will be that old man on the rocking chair telling the stories of when I was a kid. But yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about, my past and my history and the sport and the awesome things I was able to do. And, thank you to all the fans who are listening now and listening in the future who may hear this. And thank you to all the fans that have come up to me in the past and, said hello and gotten a photo with me, or even just spoken to me in person. I appreciate every moment. Thank you to all the fighters that have given me the opportunity to take photos with them and hang out with them, and all the fighters I've been given the opportunity to stand across the octagon from, or stand across the cage or ring from. You guys have helped, create who I am today and build my career and my legacy. Thank you to everyone. And obviously, thank you to all the people, all my students and staff and coaches here at King's Academy that allow me to keep doing what I love and keep being involved in the sports that I'm still so passionate about. Thank you for coming in every day and being involved and saying hello. I really appreciate you guys. And then, finally, most importantly, thank you to my family for their support and everything. And thank you for being there because, they're a driving motivation to a lot of what I do nowadays. Back in the day, my motivation was to succeed, it was to challenge myself to be better than I am today. And today, my family is that motivation to challenge myself to be better and to be better today than I was yesterday. So thank you to everyone. Hopefully I didn't miss anyone. I really appreciate the time you guys have taken, and good to meet you.